My son hadn't answered his phone in 2 weeks. I decided to go to his house unannounced. But when I got there, I noticed something moving under my grandson's bed. When the police lifted the mattress, what we found left everyone frozen in shock. Why, I'm glad you're here. If you're watching this video, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're listening to my story of revenge from. I want to know how far it's reached. I still remember it perfectly. On that fateful day, I took the first bus heading to Philadelphia. During the 3-hour ride, I didn't say a single word. My eyes were glued to the window, and my heart was tied in a knot. I told myself to calm down, but my hands trembled as I held the ticket. When I got off at the main terminal, it was already getting dark. I walked quickly toward the gated community where Anthony lived, down the same path I had walked dozens of times to visit him and Jerome, my grandson. But this time, every step felt heavy, like I was walking into a nightmare. Standing in front of the familiar wooden door, I knocked. First gently, then with more and more force. "Anthony! Jerome!" I shouted, but my voice broke in the cold air. No one answered. I put my hand on the doorknob just to try my luck. But when I turned it slightly, the door creaked open. It was unlocked. My heart started pounding 1,000 miles an hour. Anthony never left the door unlocked. He was always so careful, especially when Jerome was home. I pushed the door open and stepped inside, holding my breath as if the slightest noise could shatter everything into a million pieces. Inside, the scene I saw left me frozen. The living room was a mess, like there had been a fight. The sofa was pushed out of place as if someone had shoved it in a rage. On the floor, a coffee mug was shattered into 1,000 pieces. The white porcelain shards were mixed with a dark, dried coffee stain. I stepped over it, my legs trembling, trying not to step on the glass. In the kitchen, I saw the water cooler jug tipped on its side, and several empty water bottles were rolling on the floor, uncapped as if someone had chugged them down in desperation. The smell of dampness and the silence of the house sent a chill down my spine. I went upstairs, feeling like I was dragging a stone with every step. My heart was beating so loud I could hear it pounding in my ears. I opened the door to Anthony's home office, empty. His bedroom was empty too. The bed still made, but with no sign of life. Finally, I reached Jerome's room. "Jerome, where are you, sweetie?" I called out, my voice hoarse. No one answered. I stood in the middle of the room looking at his toys, the Lego blocks, his old teddy bear, and I felt like my heart was going to break. Suddenly, a small noise came from under the bed, a scraping sound like a plastic bottle rolling on the hardwood floor. I froze and a chill ran down my entire back. My heart pounded even harder, so hard I thought it would burst out of my chest. There was something under the bed. I wanted to bend down and look, but my feet felt glued to the floor. I took a step back, grabbing the edge of a desk with a trembling hand to keep from falling. "Jerome, I called..." "Jerome," I called out again. But only silence answered me, except for that tiny, clear sound like a warning. Panic took over. I ran out of the house with my hands shaking so badly I had to dial the police number 3 times to get it right. "My son is missing. I haven't heard from him in 2 weeks. I practically screamed into the phone, my voice cracking. "There's a strange noise under my grandson's bed." I stammered, not even sure what I was saying. I just knew I needed someone to come in fast. In less than 10 minutes, the red and blue lights of a patrol car lit up the window. I led the 2 police officers to Jerome's room, and with a shaky finger, I pointed at the bed. "Under there," I whispered, not daring to look. A young, tall officer knelt down and said in a firm voice, "Is anyone under there?" A heavy silence so thick you could barely breathe filled the room. Then without another word, the 2 officers lifted the bed in one single motion. And there I saw him. It was Jerome, my grandson, curled up underneath. He was so thin, his hair matted with sweat, and his clothes were filthy, giving off a sour smell. He was clutching an empty water bottle, his eyes wide open, expressionless, as if he were looking into a world I couldn't reach. I stood there paralyzed, feeling my heart stop. The 2 officers were also in shock, unable to say a word. I fell to my knees, wanting to hug him, but my hands were shaking so much I didn't dare touch him. "Jerome, my boy," I whispered, tears welling up. He didn't respond. He just stayed there, clinging to his bottle as if it were the last thing keeping him alive. I didn't know what had happened, but I knew this nightmare was just beginning. My name is Monique Harris. I'm 62 years old, a black woman with deep brown skin, full lips, and curly gray hair that I've worn in twists for years. I live alone in a small town not far from a major northeastern city. My story begins one morning in late October when I first realized Anthony was gone. It was 2 eternal weeks where I lived with an anxiety that had no answers. The first day I called Anthony to see how he was, like I always did. I was sitting at the kitchen table, phone in hand, listening to it ring over and over until it went to voicemail. No answer. I sent him a message, a short one. "Are you okay, son?" But the message just sat there undelivered. A tight, uneasy feeling started twisting in my stomach, the kind that tells you something isn't right. Still, I tried to reassure myself maybe he was tied up at work. Maybe his phone had died. Maybe he was somewhere with no reception. Anthony has always been independent, always on the move, so I tried to steady my nerves. But as the days passed, that uneasiness spread through me like a slow-burning flame. I called him at odd times, dawn, late at night, even during lunch when he usually picks up, and every time there was nothing but silence. I left voicemail after voicemail, my voice shaking. "Anthony, where are you? Please call me. I'm so scared something's wrong." But those messages vanished into the void, as if they never reached him at all. My mind began to race toward the darkest possibilities. Anthony wasn't the kind of man who vanished without a word. He never missed our weekly calls. He'd update me about work, about Jerome, my grandson, about the small, ordinary parts of their lives. This sudden silence didn't fit him in the slightest. By the 5th day, I was unraveling. The worry was swallowing me whole. I dialed his landline, praying to hear his voice, or even Jerome's cheerful chatter, that little 8-year-old who loved telling me about school, but all I heard was the phone ringing endlessly in an empty house. Desperate, I opened the messaging app the kids like to use and typed a message to Jerome. "Honey, where are you? Call Grandma." The message went through, but it was never marked as read. My stomach dropped. Jerome might be young, but he knows his way around a phone and he adores me. Something was terribly, terrifyingly wrong. He always answered as soon as he saw a message from me. I started calling Anthony's friends and coworkers. They were all surprised, their voices hesitant. "I haven't seen Anthony all week," a coworker told me. "I thought he was on vacation." A close friend of his said, "The last time we talked was last month." Anthony told me he was swamped with work. No one knew anything more. The more I asked, the more I felt like I was lost in a void with no answers. Anthony is not one to disappear without notice. He's a dedicated father, a caring son. Something had to have happened. On the 10th day, I couldn't stand the waiting any longer. I looked up the neighbors who lived near Anthony's house, calling everyone I had a number for. They sighed on the other end of the line, their voices full of pity. An elderly woman who lives across the street from Anthony's house told me that last week, on the night of the storm, she saw a light in Anthony's house suddenly turn on and then off. "I thought the boy just turned on the light to go to bed," she said, but her voice trembled as if she also felt something was wrong. Her words stabbed my heart like a knife. The night of the storm. A light that turns on and off. Something was very wrong. I was sure of it. 2 weeks passed and all my efforts were in vain. Not a message, not a call, not a sign. I couldn't sleep. I spent my nights staring at the ceiling, imagining everything. Did Anthony have an accident? Was he kidnapped? Or did he just want to go somewhere? But no, Anthony would never leave Jerome. He was his whole world. And Jerome, my grandson, where was he? The more I thought, the more I couldn't breathe. I couldn't just stand by for another minute. I decided to go to Anthony's house, and what I found only made my anguish grow. Now I'm sitting in the dim light of a hospital room, my hands gripping the edge of the chair, as if letting go would make the whole world collapse. Jerome was lying in the bed, his small body almost lost in the white sheets. A police officer carried him in his arms from that cold house, and I, like a soulless shadow, ran after them. My hands trembled when I touched him, wanting to hold him, but afraid to squeeze too tight, scared I might hurt him. Jerome didn't react, not a blink, not a sigh. His little hands clutched the empty water bottle as if it were the last thing anchoring him to this life. The patrol car sped through the dark city streets, the sound of the siren echoing in the night. I sat next to Jerome, fanning him with a piece of paper I found in the house, while gently patting his back. "Jerome, Grandma's here," I whispered with a broken voice. But the boy remained like a living statue, his eyes wide open, staring at nothing. I wondered what happened to my grandson and to Anthony, that trashed house, the empty water bottle, and the noise under the bed. It was all like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. At the hospital, doctors and nurses rushed Jerome into the emergency room immediately. I stayed outside, my hands pressed against the glass door, watching them move quickly around him. The sound of machines mixed with the hurried voices of the doctors. No external injuries, severe malnutrition, severe dehydration. Signs of psychological trauma. Every word was like a stab to the heart. Psychological trauma. My 8-year-old grandson, that boy who always smiled like the morning sun, was now there, so thin, like a dry leaf that could blow away at any moment. A little later, the doctor let me in. Jerome was already on an IV, a thin tube connected to his skinny arm. His eyes were still open, but they weren't looking at me, but at a distant place, a place I couldn't reach. I took his cold little hand and called his name. "Jerome, it's me, Grandma. Wake up. Please say something." But the boy didn't respond. He didn't even blink. I sat beside him on the bed, and the tears started to fall. I remembered the days when Jerome was little, when he would run around my yard, laughing his head off, asking me to tell him stories about when I was young back home. Now that smile was gone, and in its place was a frightening silence, as if my grandson had locked his soul away. The police also arrived at the hospital with their notebooks and questions. A young, serious-looking officer sat next to me. "Ma'am, could you tell us when you last had contact with Mr. Anthony?" I shook my head, a lump in my throat. "It's been 2 weeks," I said with a trembling voice. "I called him. I sent him messages. I did everything but nothing. Anthony would never do something like this. He always called me at least once a week." The officer jotted down notes, nodding, and then turned to ask the doctor about Jerome's condition. They spoke in low voices. "The victim shows no life-threatening injuries, but he's in a state of severe post-traumatic shock." Hearing those words, I felt as if a stone was crushing my chest. Post-traumatic shock. What did Jerome have to go through to end up like this? I wanted to demand answers, but the officer just took notes and told me, "We're opening a missing person case. Could you come with us to the precinct to give a full statement?" I shook my head, almost begging, "Let me stay with my grandson. I can't leave him alone right now." They nodded, agreeing, but their eyes were filled with concern, as if they also felt the dark shadow hanging over my family. That night, I sat by the bed, watching Jerome tremble as he slept in fits. He clutched the empty water bottle tightly, even in his sleep, as if he were afraid someone would take it from him. Sweat ran down his forehead, soaking the pillow. Occasionally he would jolt awake, his eyes wide with terror, but he wouldn't say anything. Just look at me with that empty gaze. I wiped his forehead with a small towel, my hand trembling. "Grandma is here with you," I whispered, even though I knew he couldn't hear me. The doctor came to check on him, a middle-aged woman with a kind look. She put her hand on my shoulder and said softly, "Ma'am, the boy needs time. He went through a huge shock. Be patient. You'll see. He'll tell us what happened." I nodded, but inside I felt a terrible heaviness. Patience. How could I be patient when Anthony was still missing, when Jerome was here like a shadow of his former self? I spent the whole night sitting there holding Jerome's hand, listening to his weak breathing. I remembered the last time I spoke to Anthony on the phone. His voice sounded tired, but he still tried to laugh. "Mom, I'm fine. It's just that work has been a bit heavy." I didn't realize how heavy it was. I didn't ask more questions. Now I blamed myself. If I had paid more attention, if I had called sooner, would things be different? 2 days passed, and I didn't move from Jerome's bedside, as if taking my eyes off him for a second would make him disappear. Jerome was still there, small and fragile, his thin hands hugging a teddy bear a nurse had given him. I tried to feed him some broth spoonful by spoonful, bringing it to his mouth, hoping he would eat something. "Eat Jerome, sweetie, so you can get strong and go home with Grandma," I whispered, my voice trembling. But the boy barely swallowed a couple of spoonfuls, then clamped his mouth shut, his gaze fixed on the ceiling. Every night was the same. Jerome had nightmares. Sometimes he would sit up suddenly in bed, his mouth open as if trying to scream, but no sound came out. I would hold him, rock him, and sing him the lullaby I used to sing to Anthony when he was a baby. But Jerome would just tremble, sweat drenching his forehead. I would wipe his brow, my hand shaking so much the washcloth would fall. I asked for a psychologist to come, a young woman with a very sweet voice. She sat next to Jerome, held his hand, and asked him gentle questions. "Jerome, do you want to tell me something about your dad or about anything you saw?" But the boy just hugged his teddy bear tighter, his eyes on the floor without saying a word. I stood to the side, my heart in my throat. "Will he talk again, doctor?" I asked, almost pleading. The psychologist looked at me with compassion. "Ma'am, he needs time. The shock was too great for a child, but I'm sure he will open up. It's just not the right time yet." I nodded, but inside I couldn't be calm. Time? I didn't know how much time I had left to wait with Anthony missing, and every passing day a torture of anguish and pain. On the morning of the 3rd day, I was cleaning Jerome's face, gently wiping a damp cloth over his thin cheeks. I tried to smile and started telling him an old story about Anthony, about when he was a boy and broke one of my vases and tried to tape it back together. Your dad was so silly, Jerome, I said softly, but he loved you more than anything in the world. Jerome didn't respond, but I saw his little fingers squeeze the teddy bear as if he were clinging to something. I was about to continue when the phone in my purse vibrated. The caller ID showed the police precinct. My heart pounded. A bad feeling washed over me. I answered my hand, shaking so much I almost dropped the phone. The detective's voice on the other end was grave, very different from his usual calm demeanor. Mrs. Harris, I need you to prepare yourself. We just used luminol to re-examine Mr. Anthony's house, and we found a very large amount of blood in the living room. My ears went numb as if the world had suddenly gone silent. The washcloth in my hand fell to the floor. I couldn't feel my own hands. Blood, I repeated, my voice breaking. The detective continued, and every word was like a knife to my heart. It's very likely we're dealing with a homicide. The crime scene has been cordoned off, pending DNA results. I was barely processing what he was saying, not fully understanding his words. Then Jerome tugged hard on my sleeve. I turned and saw his red, tear-filled eyes as if he had heard everything. And then, after so many days of silence, Jerome burst into tears, a heartbreaking cry that shattered the calm of the hospital room. Dad, he's dead, he screamed, his voice weak but full of pain, as if his entire world had just collapsed. I fell back into the chair, hugging him with all my strength as tears streamed down my cheeks. No, Jerome, no, it's not like that, I told him. But I didn't even believe my own words. His few words had been like a hammer blow to my heart. Jerome's cries were heard over the phone, and the detective said quickly, "Ma'am, calm down. We're on our way to the hospital right now to take an initial statement. Please don't move from there." I didn't answer. I just hugged Jerome tighter, letting my tears soak his clothes. The nurses and doctors rushed in, surely alerted by the crying. A young nurse knelt down and put her hand on my shoulder. "Mrs. Harris, stay calm. Let us take care of the boy." But I shook my head, holding Jerome even tighter. "No, I have to be here with him," I said, my voice choked. I couldn't leave him. I couldn't leave him alone in this minute, not after he had just said those horrible words. The doctor checked Jerome and gave him a mild sedative to calm him down. He slowly stopped crying, but his eyes remained red, looking at me with a pain I couldn't soothe. I stroked his hair, whispering, "Grandma's here, Jerome. I'm not going anywhere." But inside I felt like I was falling into an abyss. If Anthony was really, I couldn't dare to finish the thought. I remembered the last time I saw my son when he came to visit me in my town, bringing me a sweet potato pie that I loved so much. "Mom, take care of yourself, okay?" he said with his bright smile. Now that smile felt like a distant memory, erased by the detective's words and Jerome's cries. An hour had passed since the detective called about the blood in Anthony's house, and now they were at the hospital with a recorder and a notebook. A young, tall, and slim police officer sat by the bed and said in a soft but careful voice, "Jerome, can you tell us and your grandma what happened?" I felt Jerome tremble in my arms, his thin little shoulders tensing up. He lowered his head, clutching the teddy bear in his hands, as if holding onto something to keep from sinking. I stroked his hair and whispered, "It's okay, Jerome, just tell us. Grandma's right here with you." I tried to make my voice sound calm, but inside I felt like I was on the edge of a cliff. I was scared of what he was going to say, but at the same time I needed to know the truth, no matter how painful. After a few minutes of silence, Jerome nodded slightly, a movement so small it broke my heart. I held my breath, squeezing his shoulder, and listened to each of his weak, broken words, as if each one was a shattered piece of his soul. That night, it was raining really hard. Jerome began, his voice trembling, almost a whisper. I was playing with my Legos in my room, building a really tall tower that Dad said was the prettiest. And then the doorbell rang many times. Jerome paused, looking at his bear, squeezing it tighter. I got curious and went to see. Dad was at the door looking through the peephole, and his face was very tense. I'd never seen him like that. A chill ran down my spine. Anthony was always calm. He always knew how to hide his worries to protect Jerome. What had scared him so much? Jerome continued, his voice getting quieter. Dad turned around and saw me standing there. He ran to me, knelt down, and whispered, "Jerome, get under the bed quickly. Don't come out until I call for you. You hear me?" I was scared, but Dad pushed me toward my room in a hurry. I got under the bed, and Dad even pulled down the comforter to cover it so no one could see me. I pictured my little boy, only 8 years old, huddled under the bed in the dark, not knowing what was happening, and I felt my heart ache through a little gap in the comforter. Jerome continued. I saw my mom come in with a very tall man. That man's face was very cold. He didn't say anything. He was just standing there with his arms crossed behind my mom. I was frozen. Ebony Jerome's mom, Anthony's ex-wife. I never thought she would come back, or rather that she couldn't come back after everything that had happened. Jerome trembled and his voice broke. My mom looked all around the room and asked, "Where is Jerome?" I got so scared. I thought she was going to find me, but my dad told her in a calm voice. He went to his grandma's when the winter break started. I knew Dad was lying, but I didn't dare to move. I felt hot tears roll down my cheeks. The police officer didn't stop writing his expression serious, but I saw his hand pause for a moment when Jerome continued. Then my mom started yelling at him. She was asking Dad for money. She said something about a debt that Dad had to pay if he didn't want trouble. But Dad shook his head and wouldn't give her any money. He told her she had gone too far, that she had bothered him enough. Hearing that broke my soul. Anthony had tried to escape Ebony's shadow. He had tried to build a new life for himself and Jerome, but she had come back bringing trouble with her. Jerome stopped breathing heavily as if the memory was dragging him back to that night of terror. I rubbed his back and whispered, "Take it easy, sweetie. Grandma is here." The boy took a deep breath and continued, "Dad?" My mom and the tall man started fighting really bad. My mom was screaming and the other man got closer, saying something like a threat. I didn't hear it clearly, but I saw him push my dad. Dad stumbled back, and then he pushed him harder. Dad fell and hit his head on the corner of the table. There was a loud thud, and red water started coming out. Jerome trembled uncontrollably, hiding his face in my chest, and burst into tears. I saw Dad lying there, not moving. I wanted to come out. I wanted to call him, but I was scared. I was so scared. I hugged him with all my strength, and my tears soaked his hair. The image of Anthony falling replayed in my mind like a nightmare. The police officer in front of me stopped writing and looked at me with compassion. "This statement is very important, Mrs. Harris," he said in a grave voice. "We are going to investigate this as a possible homicide. The boy has been very brave." I nodded, but inside I felt an emptiness that nothing could fill. Jerome kept crying. His sobs were like knives in my heart. I looked at the officer and said with a choked voice, "Are you going to find her by Ebony and that man?" He nodded firmly. "We will do everything possible, Mrs. Harris. I promise you." When the police left, I stayed there hugging Jerome, feeling the shadow of tragedy that had just fallen upon my family. That night, after the police left, I couldn't sleep a wink. Jerome's soft sobs echoed in the room like stabs to my heart. He moved his lips, calling for his dad in his dreams, in a voice so faint I had to lean in close to hear him. Every time he did, I would gently wipe his face with a warm cloth, hoping to soothe even just a little the pain he carried. But as I touched his cold skin, old memories came rushing back, hurting as if someone were pouring salt on a wound that had never healed. I remember Anthony when he was young in his 20s, his career just beginning, his eyes full of faith in the future. I remember the pride with which he introduced me to Ebony, with a smile that shone like the summer sun. "Mom, this is Ebony," he said, his voice full of pride. "She's going to be my wife." Ebony back then was a good girl, a bit clumsy, but always trying to do things right. She would blush when I taught her how to cook. And I remember thinking, yes, this girl is good. She's going to make Anthony happy. The whole family loved her, not just for her warm smile, but for the way she looked at Anthony, as if he were her entire world. Then Jerome was born, and it was as if a new light had been lit in our family. I still remember the day I took him out for a walk in the yard with Jerome nestled in my arms, his round little eyes looking at me with a grin from ear to ear. The neighbors would joke, "Mrs. Harris, you look 10 years younger." I would laugh, my heart full of joy. Anthony and Ebony were still happy then. They would visit me often, bringing Jerome and their stories of their new life. I thought it would always be like this, that our small family would always be full of laughter. But then everything started to fall apart. I remember the day I got a call from Anthony. His voice sounded dull, tired. "Mom, Ebony, she got into some gambling trouble." I froze. I couldn't believe that good girl had fallen into something like that. The first time Anthony quietly sold the car he loved so much, the car he had saved for years just to pay off his wife's debts. I saw him sitting in the yard, his eyes red, but he still tried to smile. "Mom, I'll be fine. I just want to help her." I took his hand, wanting to say something, but I kept quiet because I understood that Anthony loved Ebony so much he was willing to do anything to save her. But things didn't stop there. The second time, when debt collectors came knocking on my door, making threats because Ebony couldn't pay, I had to take out all my savings. It was the money I had saved for my old age, but I didn't hesitate. I just wanted to protect my family. Mom, I'm sorry. Anthony told me that night. His voice choked. I didn't think things would get to this point. I hugged him and told him not to worry, that family was for supporting each other. But inside, I started to feel scared. Ebony was no longer the good girl she used to be. Every day that passed, she changed more. Ebony became irritable, capable of breaking plates over the smallest thing. I remember one time I went to visit and I saw Jerome huddled in a corner, his eyes red because his mom had yelled at him just for spilling a glass of milk. Ebony was there screaming at him. "You're just as clumsy as your father." I ran over and pulled Jerome away, trying to calm her down, but she just laughed bitterly. "He's my son. I know how to raise him." Those words were like a stab in my heart. Jerome didn't deserve to endure those fits of rage. I looked at Anthony and I saw him consumed. His eyes that once shone now only reflected exhaustion and helplessness. Many nights Anthony would call me, venting through tears. "Mom, I can't take it anymore," he would tell me, his voice trembling. "Ebony is not the woman I fell in love with. I'm afraid she'll hurt Jerome." Hearing him broke my soul, but I could only console him. "Son, if you need me, I'm here. I'll help you." Finally, Anthony decided to divorce and fight for custody of Jerome. The day the judge made the ruling, I saw him sigh in relief, as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. I felt the same way. I thought that finally father and son would have a quiet life, that Jerome would grow up with Anthony's love without any more shouting or heavy debts. But I was wrong. Barely half a year later, Ebony returned, bringing with her a much worse nightmare. The story Jerome told me about that stormy night, about how Anthony fell and lay motionless on the floor, kept replaying in my head. Ebony, the woman I once loved like a daughter who was the mother of my grandson, had become a stranger, a cruel person. Sitting in the darkness of the hospital room, I watched Jerome sleep and I heard him sob, his lips still moving to call for his dad. I made a promise to myself. "Anthony, I will get justice for you. I will protect Jerome no matter what it costs." The next morning, the sun streamed through the hospital window, but it couldn't take away the chill I felt inside. I sat next to Jerome, watching him sleep soundly after the sedative. His small face looked calmer, but the mark of pain was still there, impossible to erase. The phone vibrated. It was a call from the precinct. The detective, in a grave but firm voice, told me, "Mrs. Harris, we have new information. Could you come to the station right now?" I nodded, though he couldn't see me, and I whispered to Jerome, "Grandma will be back in a little while. Be good. The nurse will take care of you." I entrusted my grandson to the young nurse whom I had gotten to know over these past few days, and hurried out of the hospital, my mind in a mess. On the way to the precinct, I was on the bus, looking out the window, but seeing nothing but the image of Anthony falling in Jerome's story. I clutched my shawl in my hands, trying to hold back the tears. When I entered the briefing room at the precinct, the lead detective, a middle-aged man with a piercing gaze, was already waiting for me. He spread a large map on the table and pointed to several red dots marked around Anthony's house. "We have a new lead," he said, his voice confident. A neighbor's security camera recorded a suspicious truck on the night of the storm. I held my breath, my heart pounding as he played the video on the screen. The image was blurry and shaky due to the poor quality, but I still clearly saw a dark truck parked in front of Anthony's house. Under the dim streetlight, I could make out the shape of something long covered with a tarp in the back. Minutes later, this truck drove away. The detective continued, pointing to another video. "We can't see the license plates clearly. They're blurry, but the model matches one used by a local loan shark gang." I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms. Jerome's story came back to me, Ebony, and the strange man wrapping Anthony in a blanket, dragging him out of the house. That long thing in the truck. I didn't dare to think further, but the pain was like a sharp knife in my heart. A young officer standing beside him added, "We've already checked the recordings from nearby traffic cameras. The truck appears at a couple of points, but then we lose its trail on the outskirts. We're already coordinating with patrols to search for it." I nodded, but I felt my head spinning. "Are you sure that truck has something to do with it?" I asked, my voice trembling. The detective looked at me, his eyes full of determination. "It's circumstantial evidence, but very important, Mrs. Harris. We're not going to let any lead go." I felt a glimmer of hope, but at the same time, the fear of what they might find left me breathless. After the meeting, the detective suggested I go back with them to Anthony's house. I hesitated. I didn't want to face that place again, but I knew I couldn't run away. When we arrived, the yellow police tape was still blocking the door, a reminder of the nightmare that had occurred. The forensics team was working inside, carefully collecting samples, taking pictures of the scene. I stood on the porch, my gaze fixed on the dried coffee stain on the living room floor, where just a few days before I had entered, and found everything destroyed. That coffee stain, along with the pieces of the cup, was like a scar that would never heal in my mind. Suddenly, an elderly neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, approached, leaning on her cane, and whispered to me as if she were afraid someone would hear her. Harris, on the night of the rain, I heard a very loud fight at Anthony's house, shouting the sound of furniture moving. I wanted to call the police, but I was scared. Scared of getting into trouble. The woman lowered her head, her eyes full of guilt. I took her hand and said with a choked voice, "Thank you for telling me. Can you tell the police now?" Mrs. Thompson nodded, and I took her to the young officer. He wrote everything down carefully, thanked her, and promised to investigate further. I watched Mrs. Thompson walk away, my heart heavy. I blamed myself, wondering if I had arrived sooner if things would have been different. Before we left, the detective gave me a gentle pat on the shoulder and said in a low voice, "We're going to find that truck, Mrs. Harris. Have faith." I nodded. But inside I didn't know if I had any strength left for hope. I left the house. The sun was shining brightly, but my heart was cloudy, as if it were about to rain. A few days after hearing Jerome's terrible story, I received a call from the precinct. The detective's voice sounded as grave as ever, but with a hint of urgency. "Mrs. Harris, we found the address of the apartment complex where Ebony lived. Do you want to come with us?" I looked at Jerome, who was sitting on the hospital bed, hugging his teddy bear and staring out the window with a lost look. I didn't want to leave him, but I knew I had to go. If there was any clue about Ebony, about what happened to Anthony, I had to see it with my own eyes. "I'm on my way," I replied, my voice trembling. I again entrusted Jerome to the young nurse, caressed his hair, and whispered, "Grandma won't be long, Jerome. Be good. I'll be right back." The boy nodded weakly, but his gaze remained empty, as if he were in a place I couldn't reach. The alley leading to Ebony's apartment complex was in a forgotten corner of the city, where the peeling walls smelled of dampness and car fumes. I walked alongside 2 police officers, my steps heavy on the muddy path. My heart was pounding not from exhaustion but from the fear of what I was about to find. When we arrived, the building's landlady, a middle-aged woman with a sour face, was sitting at the entrance smoking a cigarette. As soon as she saw the police, she sighed in annoyance as if she were used to these kinds of problems. "That Ebony," she said with a dismissive voice. "She left about 2 weeks ago, handed in the key, and took off." Her words were like a blow to the chest. 2 weeks ago, exactly when Anthony disappeared, when his house became a scene of chaos, I stood frozen, clutching my shawl to stay calm. The young police officer, the tall and slim one, asked, "When she left, was she carrying a lot of things?" The landlady nodded, putting out her cigarette in an ashtray. "Yeah, a huge suitcase. She looked like she was in a real hurry, like she was running from something. Even hired some guy to drive her away at night. Didn't say anything except to pay up." Just as we were about to leave, a strange man appeared at the end of the alley. He had a rough appearance with a worn leather jacket and a face full of scars. He approached and asked the landlady in a hoarse voice, "Is Ebony still here? I need to see her urgently." The detective stopped him immediately with a look as cold as ice. "Who are you? What's your business with Mrs. Ebony?" The man stuttered clearly, surprised, and tried to back away, but the young officer held him. After a moment of nervousness, he sighed, his voice annoyed. "I'm Daryl, her loan shark. Ebony owes me a lot of money. She swore she'd pay me back in 2 weeks, but now she's nowhere to be found." "Yeah." And the police and I looked at each other. No one said anything, but I knew we were all thinking the same thing. The moment Ebony fled, the moment Anthony disappeared, and now the promise of a large sum of money, it all fit together in a terrifying way. The young officer muttered, as if asking himself, why would she be so sure she'd have a large amount of money in 2 weeks if she was so desperate before that she had to seek out her ex-husband? That question was like a knife in my heart. A bad feeling grew inside me, cold and cruel, making me tremble. There was something darker behind all this, and I feared the truth was even more painful than I had already imagined. That night, I sat by Jerome's bed. The dim light from the hospital hallway illuminated his sleeping face. He was still hugging his teddy bear as if it were the only thing anchoring him to this world. I took his hand, feeling the faint warmth of his thin fingers, and tried to calm myself. But then, like a flash of lightning in the dark, a vague memory surfaced in my mind, making my heart race. Many years ago, when Anthony and Ebony were still happy, Anthony proudly showed me a life insurance policy he had bought. "Mom, I want to protect my family," he told me with his radiant smile. "If anything happens to me, Ebony and Jerome will have nothing to worry about." The sole beneficiary at that time was Ebony, and now thinking about it, I realized that Anthony never mentioned changing the beneficiary's name after they divorced. That memory was like a stab in my heart. Could Ebony, with her huge debt and desperation, have set her sights on Anthony for the insurance money? I started to tremble, not from the cold, but from a horrible premonition that was suffocating me. I looked at Jerome. I saw him sob in his sleep, his lips moving to call for his dad. I couldn't stay still for another second. The next morning I called the detective, my voice trembling. I remembered something. Anthony had a life insurance policy and Ebony was the sole beneficiary. Can you investigate that? He was silent for a moment and then replied, "Thank you, Mrs. Harris. That could be a key lead. We'll go to Mr. Anthony's house right now." I entrusted Jerome to the nurse, asking her not to leave him alone, and went with the police to Anthony's house. As we entered, the yellow tape was still on the door, a reminder of the nightmare. The forensics team had already left, leaving the house cold and silent. The detective took me and a young officer to Anthony's study, where he used to organize his papers. They rummaged through the file cabinet, checking every folder, while I stood there clutching my shawl, a knot in my stomach. After more than an hour, the young officer exclaimed, "I found it." He held a blue folder opened. It reviewed it and passed it to the detective. He glanced over it, then lightly tapped the folder against the desk and said with contained anger, "Here it is, the motive." I looked at the paper and saw Ebony's name printed clearly in the beneficiary section. My feeling was right. Anthony, out of love and responsibility, had unwittingly left the path clear for Ebony to take advantage. I sank into a chair, tears streaming down my cheeks. "Why didn't you change it, Anthony?" I whispered, my voice choked. "Why did you give her the chance?" The detective placed a hand on my shoulder and said gravely, "Mrs. Harris, if Anthony died in an accident, Ebony would receive all the insurance money. With that amount, she could pay off all her debts and live comfortably. This is likely the reason he disappeared." His words were like a hammer blow to my head. I clenched my fists, an immense rage growing in my chest. Ebony had become a monster, willing to take Anthony's life for money. I remembered her face when she was young, when she smiled happily next to Anthony, and I wondered what had made her change so much. Ambition, desperation, or was she simply a person who had lost herself? That afternoon, when I returned to the hospital, the phone rang again. It was the detective. His voice sounded more urgent. "Mrs. Harris, we've just received news from the investigation team. They found an abandoned frozen goods warehouse on the outskirts, a place the Loan Shark gang uses for their illegal activities. We've already sent a special team there." I felt my heart pound like a war drum. "What do you suspect?" I asked, my voice trembling. He hesitated. "We're not sure, but it's possible that we might find some clue about Mr. Anthony." I sat by Jerome's bed. My hands were shaking so much I couldn't hold a glass of water. That night, when Jerome was already asleep, the phone rang once more. I answered, my hand shaking so much I almost dropped it. The police officer's voice on the other end was halting as if he were choosing his words very carefully. "Mrs. Harris, we found a body, a man hidden in the frozen goods warehouse. We suspect it's Mr. Anthony." I collapsed a lump in my throat, unable to say a word. My world fell apart. Anthony, the person I loved most, was now just a body in a cold warehouse. I wanted to scream that it wasn't true, but only tears came out. "Are you sure?" I whispered, my voice broken. "We need you to come and identify him," he replied, his voice full of pity. "But please prepare yourself." The next morning I went with the police to the morgue, feeling a terrible fear clutching my heart. On the way, sitting in the back of the patrol car, I clutched my shawl and looked out the window, seeing nothing but Anthony's face. I remembered his smile, the way he would tease me when I burned the sweet potato pie. "Mom, if you open a bakery, I'll be your first customer," he would say, his voice cheerful. Now that smile was just a memory, and I was about to face a truth I didn't want to believe. When the car stopped in front of the morgue, I got out feeling like I was walking in a dream. The young police officer, the one who had been with me these past few days, put a hand on my shoulder and said softly, "Mrs. Harris, are you ready?" I nodded, though inside I knew I would never be ready. The door to the cold room opened, and a frigid air smelling of chemicals hit my face, making me shiver. The white sheet covering the gurney was slowly pulled back, and then I saw Anthony's face. Although it was pale, although it was changed by time and death, I recognized my son instantly. His thick eyebrows, his straight nose, and the lips I kissed so many times when he was a baby. He was still my Anthony. I burst into tears, falling to my knees on the floor, only able to say 2 words. "My son." I wanted to touch him, to hug him one last time, but my hands were shaking so much I couldn't lift them. The young police officer helped me up, his voice full of sorrow. "We are so sorry, Mrs. Harris. Please sit here." But I didn't want to sit. I didn't want to do anything but scream at the world why my son had to be gone like this. When I calmed down a little, the medical examiner, a middle-aged man with a grave voice, approached. He held a folder and explained, "The victim died from severe traumatic brain injury caused by a strong blow against a hard object. The time of death is estimated to be the night of the storm 2 weeks ago." His words confirmed what Jerome had told about that terrible night when Anthony fell and lay motionless on the floor. I nodded, but every word he said was like a knife sinking deeper into my heart. "Thank you," I whispered, not quite sure why I was saying thank you. Maybe for the truth, as cruel as it was, the police didn't stop. They expanded the investigation, examining the truck that the security camera had recorded. The detective called me at noon, his voice full of determination. "Mrs. Harris, we found a blanket stained with red and a woman's jacket in the truck bed. The DNA results confirm the stain is Mr. Anthony's blood, and the jacket belongs to Ebony." I collapsed into a chair in the hospital hallway, my hands on my chest. All the loose pieces now fit together, forming a picture of the crime, so clear it was chilling. Ebony had really done it. She had taken Anthony's life. Using the statement from the loan shark we found at the apartment complex, the police quickly arrested the unknown man who accompanied Ebony that night. They invited me to the precinct to watch the interrogation from outside through a one-way mirror. The man with a rough appearance initially denied everything, grunting, "I don't know anything. I just went with her." But when the police showed him the evidence, Ebony's jacket and the blanket found in the truck, his face turned pale and he started to sweat. The detective told him in a harsh voice, "Do you think we don't know? You helped her hide the body talk if you don't want your sentence to be worse." Finally, to get a deal, he confessed where Ebony was hiding. An abandoned house on the outskirts of the city where she was hidden away. I stood outside the interrogation room, clutching my shawl, feeling the world spin. Ebony, the woman who once had dinner with my family, who laughed with Jerome, was now a fugitive carrying a crime on her shoulders. I remembered the last time I saw her before she and Anthony divorced. She looked at me with cold eyes. "Stay out of it, Harris. This is between Anthony and me." I tried to stop her. I tried to tell her that Jerome needed his mother, but she just laughed, bitterly. Now, that laughter came back to my mind like a warning I had ignored. A few days after identifying Anthony's body, I received the news that the police had arrested Ebony. They caught her in a small copy shop trying to forge documents to flee the city. The detective called me. His voice was soft but firm. "Mrs. Harris, we have her. Do you want to come to the precinct?" I hesitated, looking at Jerome, who was drawing on the hospital bed, still hugging his teddy bear. "No," I replied, my voice choked. "I don't want to see her. Just make sure she doesn't escape." But in the end, as the police led Ebony down the hallway of the precinct, I watched from a distance, seeing her handcuffed, her face gaunt, and her hair disheveled. I felt a mix of anger and deep down a strange pity. Ebony, who was once my daughter-in-law, who was Jerome's mother, had destroyed her own life and the lives of the people she loved most. The trial took place in the city courthouse, attracting the attention of the press and the public. I sat in the front row, holding Jerome's hand tightly, feeling his little hand tremble in mine. He didn't want to come, but I gently convinced him. "Jerome, we have to do this for your dad. Grandma will be right here with you." He nodded, but his eyes were still full of fear. The courtroom was packed. The air felt heavy, like a rope about to snap. The prosecutor, a tall man with a sharp voice, stood up and presented the evidence one by one. He played the recording of Jerome's statement, my grandson's small voice trembling as he recounted the night of the storm. Hearing it squeezed my heart, and I hugged Jerome tighter as he lowered his head, hiding his face in his bear. The prosecutor continued, showing photos of the blanket and Ebony's jacket found in the truck. "The DNA results confirmed that the blood belongs to the victim, Mr. Anthony," he said, his voice cold. He then projected the images from the security camera, the blurry truck under the streetlight carrying something long covered with a tarp. Finally, he held up the life insurance policy folder, pointing to Ebony's name as the beneficiary. "This was the motive," he declared, his voice echoing in the room. "The defendant planned a murder to collect the insurance money, pay off her debts, and live comfortably." I looked at Ebony sitting in the defendant's box, her head bowed. At first, she tried to remain calm, avoiding everyone's gaze, but as the evidence was presented, she began to tremble. Suddenly, she jumped up and shouted, "I didn't mean to kill him. I just wanted my money." Her voice broke, but no one in the room was moved. The prosecutor approached and refuted coldly. "If you only wanted money, why did you hide the body? You staged a fake accident scene and tried to collect on a life insurance policy." Ebony was speechless. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. She turned to her accomplice, the rough man who was with her that night, and screamed, "It was him! He pushed Anthony!" The man immediately stood up, his face red with fury, and pointed at her. "You were the one who planned everything. I just did what you told me. You told me to push him to help you hide the body." The atmosphere in the courtroom grew tense. The murmurs of the crowd sounded like a wave. I hugged Jerome, feeling him tremble. "Grandma," he whispered, his voice small. "It was all my fault, wasn't it?" I stroked his hair, trying not to cry. "It wasn't your fault, Jerome. Your mom made a mistake, and she's going to have to pay for it." But inside, I knew those words couldn't heal the wound in Jerome's soul. After hours of deliberation, the judge, a woman with a serious gaze, stood to deliver the verdict. Her voice was clear and firm. The defendant, Ebony, is found guilty of first-degree murder and fraud and is sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The accomplice is found guilty of accessory to murder and concealment and is sentenced to 20 years in prison. When the sentence was read, I broke down crying, hugging Jerome with all my strength. My tears were not only for the pain of losing Anthony, but also for the relief that justice finally had been served. Jerome hid his face in my chest, crying uncontrollably, and I could only rub his back, whispering, "It's over, my boy. Your dad can finally rest in peace." A few weeks later, I decided to close up Anthony's house for good. I couldn't go back to that place, which was once filled with the laughter of my son and grandson, and was now just a painful memory. I took Jerome to live with me in my small town. I enrolled him in therapy, hoping that the wounds in his heart would slowly heal. Every night I sit by his side and I tell him stories about Anthony from when he was a boy, about how he always wanted me to be proud of him. "Your dad loved you so much, Jerome," I say, stroking his hair. "And Grandma does too." That night, I sat by the window with Jerome asleep in my arms. The moonlight streamed in soft like a comfort. I looked up at the sky and whispered, "My son, I promise you I will raise and protect Jerome for you. Justice has been served." Tears rolled down my cheeks, but I felt a small bit of peace, as if Anthony were somewhere smiling down at me. I hugged Jerome, knowing that although the pain of losing my son will never go away, I still have him, and I will spend the rest of my life taking care of him just as Anthony did. After everything we've been through, from the bottom of my heart, I want to say to you who have followed my story to this moment that the love and care for family should never be taken for granted. A single oversight can lead to a tragedy with no turning back. Ambition and betrayal can turn your loved ones into strangers, but justice will always speak if you are persistent until the end. I learned that true strength comes when you rise up to protect those you love, even in the midst of the deepest pain. And above all, loss taught me to value every second together, because the love of family is the most valuable legacy we leave to the next generations. The story you have just heard has had names and places changed to protect the identities of those involved. We don't tell it to judge, but in the hope that someone will listen and stop to think about how many mothers are suffering in silence within their own homes. I truly wonder if you were in my place. What would you do? Would you choose silence to keep the peace, or would you dare to face it all to reclaim your own voice? I would like to know your opinion, because every story can become a light that illuminates the path for others. God bless you all, and I'm sure that courage will lead us to better days. For now, on the end screen, I will leave you with two of the channel's favorite stories. I assure you they will surprise you. Thank you for being with me until this moment.